I saw it in the spray. How I saw it on the way. How I wondered who was here. Long time before this. Spider weaving land to sea. Underwater, what could be? All time turning with the wind. All eyes riveted.
Morning, everyone. I guess we'll just chill for a couple of moments while we wait for maybe a few people to come in. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone is staying hydrated and ready for this. I have been planning to do this stream for a couple weeks now. I just had a family thing I had to do. But a lot has happened. So we're going to try and parse through all of that information. It's going to be a lot. I'm going to give the trigger warning or viewer discretion warning. We are talking about a really difficult case. This isn't a particularly fun subject. It is about missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. I'll also just make the disclaimer, I'm not Indigenous, I'm not Métis. I just think it's important to talk about these things. We're getting close. We're getting really close. I think the prosecution is doing a really good job of laying the groundwork. But before we start quite there, I want to talk about something else that's happened kind of in the same realm, at least when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. If you're not familiar with Canadian history,
with so many choices, how do you pick the right dog food?
I don't have YouTube Premium. Recently, a known serial killer by the name of Robert Pickton, who, in very much the same manner as the current fellow, hey Mari, he also picked his victims from. They were mostly Indigenous women. They were usually, unfortunately, in difficult positions. A lot of them didn't have homes. Quite a few of them were doing sex work to keep themselves afloat. So, like, just as an example of the history that Canada has with this sort of thing and why it is such an issue. But Robert Pickton.
Corrections Canada has confirmed that this past Sunday, Robert Pickton was the victim of a major assault by another inmate at the Port Cartier Maximum Prison in Quebec. He was allegedly speared in the head with a broken broomstick and is undergoing surgery. And for Sarah DeVries and Lorelei Williams, they don't believe Robert Pickton is a victim. And here on this rainy day, they came to honor the true victims, their families.
They're not going to be forgotten, and they're going to be remembered and honored still.
Sarah's mother, also named.
So if you're not familiar with the name Robert Pickton, he is infamous because he fed a lot of his victims to pigs to dispose of the evidence. He may have also fed some of the meat to people. There's a lot of like discussion around that. Good morning, Lex. I hope you're well. Pickton was charged with six murders and was found guilty. So he's filling the longest sentence you can in Canada for that sort of thing. But they found, I think, the DNA of like 32 women on his farm. There's also the discussion that his brother is still out. His brother may have been involved. There's also a bit of discussion that police were involved. And also, it's interesting timing because he was going to be releasing a book. He was writing a book to discuss some of the claims, and one of those claims is that he didn't commit these acts. He didn't kill these women on his own. So he is a very evil man. I don't have a lot of sympathy for him, as the two women in the news article just said.
Sarah went missing in 1998. Lorelei Williams' cousin Tanya Holick went missing in 1996. Both women's DNA was found on the farm in Port Coquitlam, formerly owned by Robert Pickton and his family. Robert Pickton was never convicted of either women's deaths, so this is their way of having some closure.
Like when I think of my cousin, I just want to cry. I was crying all last night as I was thinking about my mother and thinking about her spirit.
For Bernie Williams, whose mother and sisters were murdered on the mean streets of Vancouver's downtown east side, she also agrees today is not about Pickton, but about the families. Robert Pickton was only convicted of 6 women, but charged with dozens more.
Every sick monster, he deserves to go out in a body bag. The families are never ever gonna receive the justice that.
And that's oftentimes one of the biggest things when it comes to these cases, is that the systematic racism and the way that we view, or the way that the legal system and our police forces tend to view cases involving Indigenous, Inuit, Métis women, Two-Spirit girls, is that they don't cover them. So they're, I don't want to say easy targets, but you know what I mean? Like, if you're looking for someone who's not, people aren't going to worry about per se, this is who you prey on. Um, and again, a lot of these women, they're not going to get the full extent of the justice because evidence was obviously lost. Only some DNA was found, just by the nature of how he was disposing of bodies, which is very horrific when you think about it. It is very predatory behavior, and I think too, it, and I bring this up too because it just also shows an example of how these cases happen. You know, like that. This happened in the 80s, so we've had it happen in the 80s. We've had it happen before, and it's happening again now. And you know, I think the Canadian government did try to do an investigation into what law enforcement can do. Um, I think we can do better. I think while it was a good first step, I expected a lot more of the Canadian government out of that. And I just think as a whole, as a country, as provinces and territories, we have to do a lot better in protecting people in our communities.
I believe that was taken from them. I think about the other women. There was 33 women, and there's no justice. So today, he's not even part of my equation today.
For Angela Marie McDougall, who knew many of the women who went missing or were murdered, she says that jailhouse justice was finally delivered to a predator that preyed on vulnerable women on these streets.
It really started to look back on the last decades of the numbers of serial killers, including this one, that have been in this neighborhood, and reflecting back on that and what it's taken for families and communities to organize, to make visible the disappearances and the deaths, and also, in a big way, holding policing and the larger system accountable for their lack of action.
And back at Trout Lake, for the families, they don't want his assault to overshadow the real story, their loved ones.
I don't want people to forget her face, her name, and what this did to our families.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
So that just happened. And another reason I bring it up, yeah, I can't imagine the suffering and the feelings and all the emotions that these families have to go through, especially to know that the police force could have done a heck of a lot better. I think that's really heartbreaking too, to think about, is that, the police force, the systems that are supposed to protect us and supposed to kind of help with these things, they didn't, and they failed, and they didn't do enough. And I don't believe he's a victim. Again, I think the timing is interesting, with him planning to have released a book, and then the wider discussion of, did he commit these acts alone? I also think it opens up a discussion in the broader sense of how we talk about cases like this, how we talk about the perpetrator over the victims and survivors, because sometimes there's a discussion, well, by giving them names and talking about them, we glorify them, and so people get really invested. You've seen the weird, creepy serial killer edits, like Richard Ramirez has a ton, and he was a horrendous, horrible human. Ted Bundy also has a lot, or with some of the school shooters like Columbine. And I think it opens that discussion on how we talk about these people and how we talk about these cases without forgetting the victims, and how do we handle these. And I don't necessarily have the best answer for that. I think it's something that we just maybe need to talk about more. Something else, sorry. Something else that came up with the case, I'm going to take this off now, stop sharing, is that the case is being heard by judge only now. So that was something we talked about in the previous stream, was whether or not the case was going to be heard by a jury. And at that time, it was believed the case was going to be heard by a jury. However, Skibicki and his legal team actually changed their plea. So they are now pleading guilty, but by reason, but not responsible, not capable of committing the crime. So kind of like that, by reason of insanity. It's called something different here in Canada. So it is now just being heard by a judge. There is no jury involved. Which I have mixed feelings about. I had hoped it was going to be by a jury. But with the change in plea, that obviously makes things different. It also does mean that details that people didn't know are able to be shared now. So more information about some of the investigation, the trial. It's not the trial, the interrogation by police officers, where he confessed to the police officers. Because initially he had only been, they were only interviewing him about Rebecca. And he admitted in that interrogation that he had killed 4 different women. There also has been a lot of other really alarming information that's come out from this. I agree a lot. Yeah, especially like there was kind of that at the beginning of the lockdown, there was that trend of like serial killer documentaries, especially on Netflix. There was the one about the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, and then there was one about Richard Ramirez. And I think sometimes the discussion goes a lot about them, and I understand why people want to know how you end up committing all of these heinous, horrible crimes against people. Um, but it's true, we do kind of lose sight of the fact that there was victims and that they lost their lives. They didn't do anything to deserve what they got. And these people, like serial killers, are horrible people. So even if we try and figure out why they did it, it doesn't excuse the fact that they committed these horrendous crimes. I had hoped, I think a lot of these should be heard by a jury, but again, I think because he's changed it, he's admitted he's guilty, but he's just not criminally responsible because of mental health. That does change the plea. So there's not much we can do by now on that. Again, I will say I think the prosecution is doing a really fantastic job laying down why he was totally aware and knew exactly what he was doing. I think the defense, his team, is going to have a very hard time trying to prove that he didn't know. And that's how these by not criminally responsible cases go, is you have to prove that the person like doesn't know, isn't able to the term is appreciate, but isn't able to appreciate the fact that they're taking someone's life. You know, the area is very famous for the Greyhound bus incident where not Timothy McVeigh, I can't remember his name now, and Timothy McVeigh was the Oklahoma bomber. Just a moment. He with Vince Lee. Is it Vince Lee? I'm getting all of my names mixed up because Tim McLean. With the killing of Tim McLean by Vince Lee, that happened because Vince Lee had a very, very long history of mental health issues, and because of cultural reasons, maybe necessarily wasn't diagnosed and was not taking proper medication, and genuinely was in a psychosis episode when he committed the crime. Still super horrific. Does not change the fact that Tim lost his life and was killed, and many people were traumatized. One of the RCMP officers who attended the scene that day has since taken their own life because they were not given the proper support needed. Good morning, I can't talk. Morning, I hope you're doing well. I'm sure you're aware of the bus killing. That was a pretty infamous case here in Canada. But because of that case, I think there's a big discussion about being found not criminally responsible. However, I don't think you can prove. I don't think Jeremy Skibicki is going to be found not criminally responsible. I think he is very responsible. I think he was very specifically targeting the women that he did for very specific, horrendous reasons, such as racism. That's what that really kind of boils down to, is just a lot of racism. That is my opinion, but I have evidence in news articles that kind of explain why I feel that way. So we are going to talk a bit more about Buffalo Woman, because she is obviously, yes, maybe not to the extent people think there was a level of cannibalism, which again I think makes it a very horrific case. I understand why people felt that the system for the people that went through that, because obviously it was on a bus, it was in a public space, a lot of people saw this happen. They felt failed by the system as well because they didn't get the support that they needed, which again I think is another thing we should have discussions about, is supporting people who are impacted by violent crimes like this. I believe Australia has a group that helps with that. They supply space and resources for families who are affected by homicide, which is a very good thing. Because there's a lot of like little gaps and holes in the system people tend to forget. One big thing is that if it happens within a home, most of the time the family who owns the home is responsible for cleaning up the I don't want to call it a mess, but you know what I mean. They have to clean these things up. They have to do all sorts of things. And sometimes it's difficult to be in your home after that, and then but staying elsewhere can be very expensive. So having not just resources readily available, but a space where they can be is important, I think. So one of the things is that we still unfortunately do not know the identity of Buffalo Woman. So this is an article from CBC, CTV, and APTN News are my resources. They're all Canadian news sources, very reliable for the most part. They have found DNA of her. Unfortunately, that DNA has not been linked to anyone. They haven't been able to link it to anyone. Now, I don't know if that's just because they can't find a match or they don't have anything to reference it to. But they do have a DNA profile. So there is the hope that if they are able to find people they believe is her family, that they can take their DNA and test it, and they'll be able to identify her that way. The female DNA profile was identified on a black and white baby fat brand jacket that Jeremy Skibicki told police he took from her after killing her. He then sold it on Facebook Marketplace. That is something that seems to have happened a few times, is that he has sold victims' items on Facebook. So that would be a big shock both for the families and for the people on Facebook Marketplace who bought those items. They haven't found any other belongings of hers. So again, we don't know who she is. We're still unsure of her identity, but she still also remains as Buffalo Women. These are the jackets. They have been released, like the photos have been released to the public in hopes that maybe they could identify her. He said the sample is now in the police crime scene database, meaning if the DNA of someone found at a crime scene ever matches the sample, the officers will be able to follow that up. The only other thing, again, we have is the jackets. They think or believe that Buffalo Woman was in her 20s, which I think is important too, just to, her identity. So if someone does know who she is or someone does come forward, hopefully they do. Prosecutors have said that the deaths were intentional, purposefully, and racially motivated, and the alleged accuser preyed on vulnerable Indigenous women at Winnipeg's homeless shelters before killing them. There's more evidence to this, but he was visiting homeless shelters, and this is where he met at least 2 of his victims, Rebecca and I believe it was Morgan, Rebecca and Morgan, that he did meet at the homeless shelters. And I think that's also really alarming, is that he was able to go into these homeless shelters and pick out vulnerable people. Other clothes and earrings and belongings have been found in the apartment. Some of it was probably kept, some of it was in the process of being disposed. Some of the bloodstains discovered in the apartment were in Skibicki's bathroom, which investigators discovered upon spraying the room with a substance that makes the bloodstains light up, even if they aren't visible to the naked eye. The bathtub was very fluorescent, so were the floors, the walls, the doors, the exterior side of the door. which implies that it was open when blood struck it. They also found biological material on the hilt of a combat knife. When it came back after being tested for DNA, it came back positive for Myron's DNA. And unfortunately, I don't know if I want to say unfortunately, but some of the family of the victims have been in the courtroom and have been listening to this evidence, and I can't imagine what that's like. I genuinely can't. Police also found Harrison's name on a Ziploc hospital bag in Skibicki's apartment, as well as about a dozen DNA samples that were taken either from the suite or nearby garbage bin, and DNA belonging to women so this is different. This is not the women that we know that he's killed, have been found as well. While some of the women have been identified, including one woman who was missing and another who has since died, others' identities are still unknown. There is no suggestion at this point that he's killed these other women than the ones he's admitted to, but that doesn't mean he didn't victimize them and assault them in some way. He has a history, as we discussed last stream, of doing these things. I don't know how you could either. You can hire crews to do it. They're usually just trained in cleaning biohazards in general up, but that's what I'm hopeful to. I'm hopeful that we will be able to put not that her identity as Buffalo Woman isn't just as valuable, but just the ability to give someone peace of mind so that they know where their loved one is. Like, I think that's a big thing that we think about. Yes, he either killed them. He admitted to killing, I believe, Rebecca in the bathtub. And he also dismembered her body, likely in the bathtub. This is the implication there. Some other really horrendous information came out about what he did past the dismemberment. It is believed that he violated their bodies as well, or that he admitted to violating their bodies after killing them. So it's yeah, and I have no reason to believe if they found other women's DNA that he probably incapacitated them in some manner and also victimized them in those ways as well. Yeah. I mean, what else would you call him? He's a piece of garbage. He's a horrible human being. So yeah, he did unexpectedly confess to killing 4 women in the 2022 police interview. At that time, he was brought in only as a suspect in the killing of Rebecca. He did initially give a name for the unidentified woman, who is Buffalo Woman, but they found out that the name he gave was of a different woman who was still alive. They were able to figure out Mercedes' identity based on details that he had given them and her DNA. It seemed to come. Okay. So at this point, the defense only asked, how long did you spend with him? And he said 10 minutes. I don't know how important that is. We have these delightful court sketches that do not do him any justice, which I'm fine with. So Manitoba's premier has weighed in on this conversation. We did just have an election in Manitoba. One of the talking points of that election was searching the landfill because the case was happening at this time. I think that we need to remember that each of these 4 women have and continue to inhabit a space of dignity. They are deserving of respect, they are deserving of value, and we should always remember that. I do think it is a call on us to act, and it is a very, very strong and stark reminder that we need to do a lot more to help people in vulnerable positions. And I fully agree with this statement. I fully agree with what Wab Canoe says here. Let's see which other ones we have. This article I brought up again because it talks about the. Did I just okay? Yeah, I hope that. I mean, he has admitted, so my hope is that he's found responsible. Again, I'm not sure. I do have a video queued up to talk about whether or not his plea is valid. He's claiming he's not criminally responsible. Again, I think the defense is setting up a really good argument to prove that he was very aware. These were very methodically planned out attacks. He has a patterned history of this. And even if he does have mental health issues that we can prove, that doesn't necessarily excuse the fact that he committed these crimes. There's a lot of people that we know who have mental health issues who do not commit horrendous crimes. So, yeah, I think it's really hard to when you don't have that thing that you can bury. I understand, like, that's a very important thing for people. And again, I can't imagine the pain that the families are going through. I'm glad you agree. It's hard not to, like, I don't want to laugh and joke, but it's also hard to just, yeah, you know what I mean. Hey, Halafala, I hope you're doing well today. I wanted to bring up, we have more evidence that things were sold. They have a few non-graphic, there's no graphic images in any of this. We just have some standard things, the courtroom document or the courtroom illustrations, things like that. While the samples taken to identify the women were just a portion of the 120 collected in the case, the more recent sample sent was all related to the search for the identity of Buffalo women. Still, unfortunately, we have not been able to find her identity. I'm wondering if it was going to say here. Yes. During his confession, Skibicki told the police that he took the jacket from the identified woman after they killed her and sold it on Facebook Marketplace. I think there's something like really disturbing about that fact alone. But they were able to recover the jacket. Court heard previously through an agreed statement of facts that the DNA of the three identified victims was also found on various items in and outside his apartment, including a blood-stained pillow, a cigarette butt, a combat knife, and a bra. So these are items that they have found in the apartment that they have been, with DNA, able to connect to Rebecca Mercedes, I can't remember her name now, and I feel really bad. To the four victims, or three of the four. Morgan. So I think that's really alarming. Investigators also found about a dozen DNA samples during their search of the apartment and a nearby garbage bin that belonged to women other than the four. So again, further clarification that there has been DNA evidence of other women. They don't believe at this point that these women have been killed by him, but there's evidence of other women in the apartment, their DNA in the apartment. And a psychiatric assessment has been ordered, which I think is a very routine thing. I think most of the time that you would want to do that. He's going to be undergoing an assessment by a forensic psychiatrist to determine whether or not he was suffering from a mental disorder at the time of the killings, as the defense plans to argue. The order was granted despite opposition from the lawyer, who said that the defense has already obtained an opinion on his client's mental state. He added he is required to advocate for Skibicki's best interest, which I understand that's just a thing defense lawyers have to do. I accept that the judge told him before granting the Crown's request, but is that the best argument you have? And the defense lawyer replied, that is my best argument. So I believe that the assessment has happened by this point. We're not sure the results of it, and we're still believing that this trial is going to continue until June the 6th, which is a lot. I think it's really alarming. One, that we have other women's DNA. I do have a little video also queued up for that. And I think it's also really alarming. Yeah, again, that he sold items. Like, that to me says he's actively getting rid of evidence. Good morning, Hyun. I hope you're doing well. Disclaimer, this is not this stream has lots of heavy topics. I'll just give that again. More funding is needed for the communities in order to strengthen their Indigenous police force so that people are protected against these predators. Agreed. I think we have to work on just the RCMP as a whole. The RCMP covers a lot of cases because not all of the cities, like if Winnipeg obviously has their own police force, but outside of Winnipeg, not every city has their own police force. So that's what the RCMP kind of covers. I think we need to strengthen city police forces to be more, I'm not sure the right word, but just more aware and more empathetic to these cases, so we don't have failures in the system like we did here and like we did with Robert Pickton and his victims. I think we need to fund, Winnipeg has a group called Bear Claw Clan, I believe that's the name. It's grassroots, Indigenous led. It posts missing peoples all the time and updates whether or not they have been found. But I do agree, we do have to do more. And I think that's part of reconciliation, is doing more. So we're going to watch a couple little videos. I want to make sure that I have them. This is the first one. We're going to share this tab instead. This is from CTV Winnipeg.
Underway today as court heard shocking details for the first time about the deaths of 4 Indigenous women. And a warning, the details are disturbing. CTV's Daniel Helmerson was in court today and joins us now live with the latest. Daniel, what did we learn today?
Marilee, we heard specific details how Jeremy Skibicki allegedly preyed on these women, invited them to his apartment, and killed them. And for the first time, we heard from Jeremy Skibicki himself. I was driven to do stuff like this because I was so spent emotionally. I killed 4 people. Those words spoken by alleged serial killer Jeremy Skibicki during an interview with homicide detectives hours after he was arrested in May 2022. A recording of the interview was played as...
So again, like he is confessed to these. He is pleading guilty to this. So I would say that we know he did it. He's just also claiming he's not criminally responsible by way of mental health.
As evidence in his trial on Wednesday, Skibicki is charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and a 4th woman Indigenous leaders have named Buffalo Woman. While Skibicki's lawyers admit the 37-year-old killed all 4 women, they argue he is not criminally responsible by way of mental disorder. This case is about a man's hate-filled and cruel acts perpetrated against 4 vulnerable Indigenous women. Crown Prosecutor Renee Lajimodier told the court in her opening argument, saying Skibicki had crafted a calculated scheme. He preyed on these women at Winnipeg.
We have evidence in way of things that he's looking up on his Facebook page, comments he's made on his public Facebook, in his searches, that he would talk about things like the extermination of the white race. So he is racist, and that is likely part of why he specifically picked Indigenous women.
Shelters and invited them back to his home, where he assaulted them, often sexually, and killed them. He then disposed of the women as though they were garbage. The Crown is asking the court to find him guilty on all 4 counts. The hours-long interrogation came following Skibicki's arrest in connection with Contois' death in mid-May 2022. During the interview, Skibicki explained how he met the victims and in detail how he killed them, defiled their bodies, and disposed of the remains. Skibicki says the crimes were racially motivated and at one point described his actions as mercy killings. Skibicki said he believes he would have continued killing if he hadn't been caught. I felt kind of like a wave or rush of guilt, and I just sobbed. But the more sick I got, the less I, cared about things. I felt as though I was being directed by God.
I believe it's in one of the other articles. I don't know if we'll get to it. One of the things that is being kind of brought up by the defense is that among the searches were things about religious-based, about being possessed, about Bible verses, and so I think that's kind of the angle that they're going with with their not criminally responsible defense. Because oftentimes when you do sue people who are genuinely not criminally responsible, where they do experience genuine episodes of psychosis, they tend to have that religious-based thing. You do see that a lot.
Court also heard a recording of the 911 call with the man who found Rebecca Contois' partial remains in a North Kildonan garbage bin. That discovery led investigators to arrest Skibicki, who lived in a nearby apartment. Court also heard from the homicide detective who was there when Skibicki was arrested. He described the accused as being calm and composed with no apparent psychotic issues or hallucinations.
Daniel, what can we expect in the coming days of this trial?
Merely tomorrow we're expected to hear from
Yeah, he claims that these were mercy killings. I don't know how you could claim that any of this was mercy killings. Again, when they go through his Facebook information, they show he is spouting and sharing and engaging in very racist information, which I think is a good example that this is a hate crime. I would say that this is a hate crime. Again, sometimes they don't necessarily always charge hate crimes because hate crimes can be difficult to prove because you have to prove what they were thinking, and you can't always prove what people are thinking. I think if they did want to charge hate crimes, they'd have a very good they would have good evidence to say that there was. But I just want to take a look because they may have in this one. Yeah, here they have in the video evidence, a video of Skibicki's interview with the homicide detectives following his arrest was played as evidence. I really just wanted to see how far, I could take these things because the criminal system is a joke. Interesting comment. I was driven to do stuff like this because I was so emotionally spent. I killed 4 people. During the roughly 7-hour interview, Skibicki tells the detectives in detail how he killed the 4 women, 2 of whom he told the detectives he dismembered in the apartment bathtub. We did have this quote as well that was read in the video. He told the detectives that he had been coming off of mushrooms when he killed the first woman, and he had been on meth when he killed the other 3 victims. I think that was also likely how he was luring some of his victims, whether it be Rebecca, Morgan, Mercedes, Buffalo women are some of the women who were not killed, but probably just assaulted. Oftentimes with homelessness, you do have drug addiction. And so some of these women were experiencing difficulties with drug addiction, putting them in even more of a vulnerable position. When he was asked why he killed these women, Skibicki told officers it was racially motivated, and he believed he was stopping what was described as the extinction of the white race. For them, it was their time. Yes, it was my decision, he said, saying he believes he was called by God. It was something I decided to do because I thought I was right. I think that's horrendous. I cannot imagine holding that kind of hate in my body either. Someone did call 911, obviously, when they found remains, part of Rebecca's remains, in garbage bins, because that's how he had disposed of them. So I think that is really interesting. Yeah. I don't know how you can say those things and be like, yes, no, there is no excuse. I think when you start to be like, yeah, I'm just doing this as a mercy killing and God wants me to do this, you're just looking for excuses. Anyone that can do this sort of crime is mentally unwell from the get. Is he trying to say it was a psychotic break? Yeah, he is. They're trying to say that he is not criminally responsible because of his mental health at the time. Sorry, I'm just adjusting my thing here. I don't think he is. I don't think that case is going to go well. I do have another quick video queued up from CTV, so it is a news clip. I hope CTV Winnipeg does not get on my case about this. But that's what they're trying to prove. They're trying to say that he didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't capable of recognizing, or as the term is, appreciating. So when they say appreciate the severity of what he's doing, that's what they're talking about. So this is, I guess I
All
can
right,
let
to
this.
Manitoba now, and we're tracking the ongoing trial of admitted serial killer Jeremy Skibicki. His ex-wife is taking the stand. It comes after.
It's important to note that his ex-wife is taking the stand, both because he was messaging her during this time period, but also because he has a history with her of abuse and violence. And I don't know if it was her or a previous girlfriend, I can't remember, he had stalked, and I believe there was like a restraining
Very
order.
disturbing testimony from a staff member at a local homeless shelter. He said that Skibicki would visit the shelter, and he told workers he had a home, but came to, quote, stalk his victims. Skibicki's ex-wife.
I don't know if I could have ever hear that sentence in my life at a homeless shelter and not immediately be like, what do you mean? Further like testimony from the gentleman who works at the homeless shelter kind of explained that they have a lot of people that come in and are experiencing like mental health problems and are having really tough times. So sometimes they do just say things and you're kind of like, okay, I guess. I believe he does suffer or is diagnosed with BPD. Again, I don't think that could substantiate the claim of not criminally responsible. Again, because like a lot of people experience BPD, they live their lives with it and they don't commit such heinous acts. There could be more of an argument with like prolonged drug use, but again, I think like the fact that he went to shelters to find these women, that they have found evidence of other women in his apartment that have likely been assaulted. He sold the jacket of Buffalo Woman after he killed her. I think like there's just evidence to prove that he was very aware and very calculating of what he was doing. That's what I think too. Like, and it's one of those hard lines, right? Because like I've worked with people who don't necessarily have like all of their mental capacity with them anymore, and they'll say and believe things, and you kind of, it's hard to handle because like you have to be aware what you're doing, but you also like can't just tell them, no, you're being weird, if that makes sense. Also, like I don't know how you go about like, can you ban people from homeless shelters? I don't mean to laugh at that, but, like, can you ban a person from a homeless shelter? Eh, especially if they're coming in like, "Oh, I totally have a home." He purposely sought out high-risk victims, he disposed of evidence, and he remarks that it's a mercy killing. He was fully aware of what he was doing, and multiple evidence of more victims isn't good either, in your opinion. I agree. I think especially with the now realization that there have been other women that he's victimized. He didn't take their lives, but he has victimized them, so he likely incapacitated them and assaulted them. I think is a very big sign that he was totally aware of what he was doing.
Wife has a protection order against him after he is said to have stalked and sexually assaulted her. He has admitted to killing 4 Indigenous women. His lawyers, though, are arguing in a controversial move that he should be found what's known as not criminally responsible, or NCR, due to mental illness. The defense lawyers will have to convince a judge of that. Robert Karras is my guest. He's a lawyer, legal analyst. Robert, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure.
All right, your takeaway. We're hearing from Skibitsky's ex-wife today and some of that lurid testimony as well. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are that the defense is engaged in a Hail Mary to try to.
I agree. I agree that this is a Hail Mary from the defense. I don't like, and again, I'm not a defense lawyer. I'm not a lawyer in general. I don't know what you would do in this situation. Like, I don't know how, like, you got assigned to this case. What are you supposed to do?
To convince the court that there should be some penalty other than the maximum, which would be life in prison with a minimum parole and eligibility of 25 years. This is, in my opinion, not a reasonable case to argue an NCR. So I think that they're doing whatever they can, and there's no downside risk for them because he's looking at the maximum no matter what you do here, unless he's not criminally responsible. So the evidence that we're hearing now is why he's not NCR, which is that he premeditated everything, that he's a violent person, that he engaged in inappropriate and violent conduct with an ex-spouse, that he that he was stalking victims. This is not the behavior of someone who's not criminally responsible.
Yeah, and as you know, the prosecution has basically said, that this is also racially motivated, that he was targeting those 4 women because they were Indigenous as well. I'm curious, what you think the judge may make of all this. You said it's really an uphill battle as we hear more and more testimony about the homeless shelter, about the ex-wife saying she was violently attacked in her.
So yeah, like as he's pointing out, there's a long history. I believe before the ex-wife, he also had a history of abusing partners. So he has a very long history of this. He's a long history of drug abuse, which I think would probably be oh, this is just his mental health is so bad because of long-term drug abuse would be the best case for the defense. I still don't think it's reasonable. I think he's going to be found guilty and responsible.
Her home several times by Skibitsky, and on it goes, Robert.
Yeah, I honestly, I like I said, I don't think that he stands a very good chance at an NCR. A judge would have to listen to all the facts and is going to hear all the evidence, is going to hear whatever battle of the experts there will be. Somebody will have to come forward as an expert, as a forensic psychiatrist, and say that upon assessment of this particular individual, he believes that at the time he was suffering from a mental disorder, and that mental disorder robbed him of the ability of appreciating the nature and quality of his actions, or from knowing that what he was doing was wrong. But I don't think that he's going to meet the threshold. A lot of people have mental illness and don't engage in violent activity, and a lot of people.
I think that's a really good point. And he also explained the threshold of having to prove this. No, he threw them out. Rebecca was found because not all of her remains, again, she was dismembered. Not all of her remains had gone to the landfill. That's why it's called Search the Landfill, is because we want landfill searched. I think most people can agree when you talk about this subject that they should be searching the landfills. Part of her remains were found at one landfill. Not Rebecca. Morgan and Mercedes are in a different landfill. The police have a general idea based on when he confessed to killing them, taking their lives. And I mean, let's be real, garbage days are a routine, easy documented thing. And usually when garbage is dumped, they do it in sections so you can kind of trace back to give a rough idea. But the landfill has not been searched, and it's unclear at this stage where Buffalo Woman would be. We don't know where her remains could be. They're likely in a landfill as well. Yeah, he admits to just throwing them in the garbage. And it encompasses two different garbages because I believe Rebecca was discovered, part of her remains were discovered at a different landfill than the other two, like Morgan and Mercedes are believed to be in. I tend to agree. Something should be done. A lot of and it's not just in Canada, like there's been a lot of cases in the United States as well where people have been dumped in landfills. And it is expensive to search them. So having that kind of maybe like a preventative measure would be a good idea, and investing in a way we could prevent these sort of things. Yeah, I think it adds another layer to I think to the racially motivated aspect of his crimes. He held hatred towards these women. He targeted them because he knew, I mean, based just on the fact that the police have fumbled the ball a lot of times when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, that there wouldn't be as much of an investigation, and that he viewed them as trash. So that's why he threw them away. And I think one of the big points with the search the landfill thing is that these women are not trash. Other Indigenous women are not trash. No one's trash. His Facebook and other background raises too many red flags. His sudden state of psychosis during the murders are too weak to be a reason. I agree. And again, I think the Crown or the prosecution, whichever term you want to use, are making a really good case. They're putting down a really great foundation. I don't believe the defense has done anything yet, because usually like the prosecution has to make their case and then defense gets to make their case. So I think prosecution is doing a really good job of laying down the case. Yeah, I agree.
Who engage in violent activity don't necessarily have mental illness. So to say that not only did he engage in violent activity and that he has a mental illness, but for the mental illness robbing him of the ability of knowing right from wrong, he would not have done these acts, I think is a very high threshold for this case and unlikely to be successful. But a judge is going to listen to all of the facts and all of the evidence and make the decision.
Robert Karras joining us. He's a lawyer, legal analyst. Hey, Robert, thanks for your time.
So I do think, again, I think that's just kind of further proof that's a lawyer's perspective. That gentleman is a lawyer. I'm just trying to think, what else do I have? We have this one now. So I'm not going to play the video. Internet searches, Facebook messages of admitted serial killer used as evidence. So these are some of the things that he has looked up. The definition of a serial killer, beheadings, garbage collecting dates, questions about DNA evidence were among the internet searches made on the computer belonging to admitted serial killer Skibicki around the time he killed these 4 women. The evidence found on Skibicki's computer as a result of a search warrant was presented to the Court of King's Bench on I believe it was this past Tuesday or a week before. Very recently. Anyway, more than 500,000 artifacts such as internet searches, and social media loggings were recovered, thousands of which raised some red flags. The Winnipeg Police Crime Intelligence Analysis testified about what he found on the computer and the Facebook messages. They just kind of go through what he's being charged with. Around the times of the killings in March and May 2022, the analyst testifies numerous internet searches were made from Skibicki's computer regarding Winnipeg's waste management system, what time garbage was collected, along with questions about DNA evidence and whether bleach would remove fingerprints. Several other internet queries focused on missing persons in Winnipeg, transit routes to 19 Disraeli, the homeless shelter, where the court previously heard Skibicki would stalk his victims. The court also heard on one day after Mercedes Myron was killed, several searches were made from Skibicki's computer, including definition of a serial killer and do Muslims behead people with knives. So I think this is really good evidence that people are just this. I don't even know how to put, if I heard all of this as a jury member, I would be like, he had to have known. He was aware. Hi, Trav. First of all, cases like this really put my stance against the death penalty they do. They put mine to the test too. As it stands, I am against the death penalty. I just don't think there is. It doesn't deter crimes, and in the cases where people talk about having death penalty for people who abuse children, unfortunately, I think it's more, if you're already going to get the death penalty, the argument is that they will just then kill the children. So it is very hard. But when you read about these cases, it does make you think yeah, it has never been an effective deterrent to crime. It also tends to cost a lot to house prisoners, because death row prisoners are held separately from. Canada doesn't have the death penalty, first of all. But in the United States, the death penalty, prisoners who are on death row, are held separately from prisoners in other high security places. So it ends up costing a lot. By the time they go through all of their appeals and stuff it's decades down the road, and a lot of people just die waiting on death row. I warn you, this is a heavy subject, but I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad people are showing up because it is important to talk about. But I will say there is a satisfaction and thinking about these people sitting in prison and having to reflect and possibly be haunted by the fact that they murdered people. So there's that discussion to be made. It does. It's hard to talk about, I guess, in that regards. Also testified that there was a photo of Skibicki holding a knife that was found on his computer, which had been uploaded around the time of Rebecca's death. He said that there appeared to be a reddish stain on Skibicki's hands, believed to be blood. So what that says to me, and also is a really terrifying thought, is that he may have recorded and photographed parts of the crime being committed. Evidently, he has photo evidence of at least after the crime was committed. And that's really disturbing because, why are you... I'm kind of at a loss for words on that. Court heard the data retrieved from the computer reference many mental health related queries, such as an internet search about explosive anger disorder and cross-examination. Defense also pointed to the Facebook messages between Skibicki and his ex-wife, in which he references having bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. So I also believe there was a claim that he had BPD, borderline personality disorder. He is going through the defense, his team has ordered a psychological assessment, and the Crown and prosecution have also ordered a separate one done by a separate person. So at least 2 will be done, or 2 have been done at this point. So it is thoroughly being looked at. Facebook messages used with his ex-wife as evidence in the trial. In Facebook messages from the account said the man discussed his sexual frustration and depraved sexual perversion with his ex-wife and told her, "I have never felt so broken sexually." Keep this in mind because the women he did murder were assaulted, and there is also DNA of other women in the apartment, likely women he assaulted but did not kill. There was also messages sent to his ex-wife on May 9th, days after Mercedes Myron was killed, telling his ex-wife, "I could be doing like 3 life sentences. I feel so ashamed for what I did before," the messages read. "I just went down a dark path because I stopped caring." In cross-examination, Skibicki's defense also raised several websites and internet searches found on the computer that were of religious content, such as Bible verses, and internet searches regarding, quote, eternal rest. They also heard about several Facebook messages from the account regarding religion, including one where Skibicki said he was being manipulated by the devil. So in his testimony to police, he says God told him to do this. And then in Facebook messages, he's like, "No, the devil told me to do it." And again, the case is going to be going until about June. They do have hotlines and support lines for people who are in need. I agree. I do believe that there's serial killers tend to take photos and items and keep them as mementos to ride the high of what they've done as long as they can before taking another life. It seems that he was just doing it very rapidly anyway, so it's hard to say what there was a point, if there was a point, or if he was just, I don't know. I can't imagine also like having to find that on a computer as like a police officer or an information analyst or analyst or technician analysis. Like, it raises that question, like, what kind of mental health resources are we providing people who have to investigate these things? Like, and again, with the case, the other, I don't want to call it a famous case, but the other well-known case that's kind of being referenced a bit when it comes to the claim of guilty but not criminally responsible when it involves Vincent Lee, is that one of the officers who had to respond to that did end up taking his life because of what he saw and the trauma that he received from what he had to deal with that day. Yeah, it makes you wonder if he's like trying to build a story. You know what I mean? Like, he's saying these things to certain people to build up this idea that God was talking to him or the devil was talking to him. So I have a couple more little videos, and I think that's where I will call it for today. We have a bit of evidence from the one, or I apologize, I don't have YouTube Premium. We do have another little clip. I think that's important to note, that the people who are either working or volunteering, I'm not sure how that works at this particular homeless shelter, do deal with people who are experiencing mental health crises. and they didn't think that Skibicki was. Yeah, he did as a result, and it's very tragic to think like I think there is a discussion when we talk about the racism and the gaps in our police system to also acknowledge the fact that there are like officers and good things are done by the police force, right? And that they are still worth putting in the effort to have the mental health resources. Personally, I believe that all first responders, as part of the fact that they are first responders, should have immediate access to mental health, whether they be um, paramedics, firefighters, police officers, anyone who is a first responder should have immediate access to mental health. I think nurses and doctors should too, like just as a general thing, but I think all first responders should. And I think taking the time to figure out a way to implement that is super important. So at the same shelter that Skibicki has been at, where he's stalking his victims, Rebecca and Morgan have been seen. So he's just doing things at really odd hours, and his neighbors are like, What are you doing?" And so, like, this is just kind of circumstantial evidence. I think it still proves, like, the weird behaviors. Um, and for the final video, I wanted to share this one because I think this is particularly alarming. It is from APTN News again. I recommend checking them out. So Andrea Cedar-Walt, her DNA was found in Skibicki's apartment, but she was not killed, which is, I would argue, further evidence that he has taken women to the apartment, incapacitated them in some level, and victimized them. So unfortunately, like as they said in the video, Andrea Cedarwall is no longer with us. But up until her passing, she was involved and was able to give evidence, and hopefully she will be able, like her testimony and the evidence that she gave will be able to help put Skibicki behind bars. So that's all I have for today. Again, I will update this case in a little bit more time. Hopefully we are able to, next time we do this, we're able to say, hey, he's been found guilty. He's going to serve to the full extent that he can. That is hard to say. And I appreciate you guys showing up. I think there's just a lot of the things going on in the world right now that sometimes stories get lost and important things get lost. And so just being able to talk about it. Oh, maybe I didn't share tabs. I apologize for that. I can link the video if anyone wants to watch it. I guess I didn't share tabs. No, that's my bad. I will share that. APTN News is also a really good source in the sense that they're an Indigenous-run news organization. So I do recommend checking them out. I'm glad everybody came. I'm going to play us out with a little song. I'll share this tab instead. I need to get YouTube Premium or something. But I hope everyone has a good day. I hope everyone takes care of themselves. Stay hydrated. Stay safe.
How I saw it in the spray. How I saw it on the way. How I wondered who was here. Long time before this.